I am happy to be joined now by one of the very best journalists in the MMA game. And for my money, he's probably the best writer that there is. And of course, it is Chuck Mindenhall himself. Chuck, how are you, sir?
I'm great, man. I'm glad we could finally align here and get this thing rolling. What a great card to actually to finally do this around. You know what I mean? It's a good
Tell
one.
me about it. I'm really excited. Obviously, UFC 254 is this Saturday in on Fight Island, and there's a lot to get to. But first, I'd like to get an update on you. As I mentioned in your intro, a lot of the MMA fans out there know who you are. You're one of the very best writers in the game. I know recently you did leave the Athletic. Tell me, what are you doing nowadays?
So, I mean, these days I haven't been as involved in the MMA game, obviously, as it was kind of nice to take a little step back, actually, and get a new perspective on it all again. But I'm still writing. Like I'll be doing something for the Ringer that'll come out on Friday. I'm still dabbling with the Ringer, and I got a couple of other projects that I'm doing that are not really related to MMA, but the pandemic and everything else. So, but writing projects that I'm working on. I'm trying to do that a little bit and stay busy otherwise with some other little projects.
Well, good for you. You deserve to be a fan after everything that you've done for the sport. And, who knows what the future holds. Maybe you have something even bigger and better around the corner. MMA, clearly, I don't know if you agree with me, but I feel like it has to be the fastest growing sport in the world. And with that being said, I mean, you look what Dana White has done with, Abu Dhabi and Fight Island. Just tell me where you feel like the state of MMA is right now.
Yeah, it's very interesting for me because again, when you're lost in the kind of constant stream of events and everything that's going on, you tend to just think in terms of what you're seeing on the ground with at each event and talking to other journalists. And you're so far in the bubble that sometimes you don't get a good perspective. I feel like I have a decent perspective as I step back now. And, I really believe there was a bit, I feel like the boom period of it, like the true boom period of it, might be in the rearview mirror. That's just a feeling I get because I think that it's been out there long enough for people who really love it to love it as much as they want and as openly as they want. The people who are curious about it have now had time to really check it out because it's it's on ESPN, it's on all these platforms that they can easily access, and we see the ads for everything now during major sporting events and everything else. Man, it's just so part of the general sports fabric now. So if you're one of those people who's just curious about it, you've had ample opportunity to basically check it out. And if you're one of those people who, you were not into it and you were open-minded enough, you probably made up your mind. So I just feel like all of those left open areas for people who might get involved or might want to get behind the sport or check it out have been filled at this point. I don't feel like it's sneaking up on anybody. The taboos have kind of rubbed off. I don't know. I know some people still view it in this archaic sense, they still think it's barbaric or whatever it is. But those people are always going to exist. It's the fight game. But I just feel like unless the UFC can get like a really major global star going again, like somebody who just unites everybody into the living room during a pay-per-view, like what Conor was doing earlier, what Ronda was doing, and all that. I feel like it's seen better days, but I feel like it's in a very healthy place. Mm-hmm. It feels like whatever I wouldn't say, I don't use the word plateau as as something bad, but where it's plateauing right now, I feel like it's a very high place, probably higher than it's ever been, to kind of maintain its enthusiasms and like the people who watch it. So I feel like it's right there. I feel like it's still there, but I don't feel like it's spiking. I don't feel like it's booming like it once was.
There are obviously guys like yourself and Ariel and Luke that have been around for a while now. And when I turn on ESPN, I don't see quite as many MMA journalists. I mean, obviously, I mentioned Ariel, you get Brett Okamoto, but you look at the other sports like the major four, basketball, baseball, football, hockey. It just seems like there's so many more opportunities out there. Do you feel like that will grow a little bit for the MMA game, or do you feel like it might just kind of stay the same with where it is right now?
It's very interesting you're asking me this question because the Athletic obviously went very big into MMA last summer, June of last year, hired 6. You follow it. If you followed it, you know that they put together a very nice MMA team with 6 writers and a very good editor. And that seemed like a very healthy thing going forward. That that the major journalism markets, that any areas of, any major publication would want to have a solid team basically working on MMA at this point, which felt very grown up, and it felt very much like it was moving that direction. But obviously the Athletic kind of gutted its MMA team. And it's really weird because the MMA side of it was running the whole time through this pandemic, pretty much the whole time. I think there was that 1 month, obviously, where everything was shut down. But they got rolling back pretty quickly. But it still didn't seem to matter in terms of comparing MMA maybe to other sports. So I kind of know what you're talking about. Like, I feel like there's less coverage in a very strange way. There's less coverage, there's less quality coverage, and that sucks. I think that part of what, I mean, if I'm looking at myself, particularly in the cog, in the whole thing, like in the wheel, like if you're looking at the whole thing, I'm like, I knew I played a role in generating enthusiasm, even if that wasn't my job. But I think that just writing about it regularly, and knowing these personalities and searching out the nuance of the game, that was part of the coverage, right? And like, so once that stuff starts to go away a little bit, I do feel like it suffers a little bit too. And outside of ESPN and obviously the regulars like MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, the more specialized places, there's not a ton, man. There's not a ton of coverage. It's very strange right now. I hope that improves after the pandemic, but right now I see where you're coming from on that.
Yeah, I can tell you, I've talked to a handful of journalists that are, doing this very part-time, very much like myself. And, seeing someone like yourself being let go and James Lynch, it's discouraging. I mean, obviously James hustles extremely hard and he has about 9,000 different jobs that he's doing to make a full-time gig for himself. But it is a little discouraging. But I do believe that it is going to turn around. I just feel like the MMA game with the UFC and what Bellator is doing with CBS Sports Network, I just feel like it's going to continue to grow, and I am excited about the future.
I think there's good reason to be excited about the future. I mean, we see these types of things where things look heading up, like the coverage is a little more broad. You see these things happening, and it's always just interesting to see how it translates. Realistically, what you want is behind it all this bursting enthusiasm from its fan base. You want it to be infectious enough where there's actual excitement when people are talking about it on social media. I don't feel like we're quite getting there again, but it might be partially just because of this pandemic and in some of the things we're talking about. There might be factors involved, but I really hope, honestly, that it can maintain that. I want it to get back to a space where it just feels good to be an MMA fan again and not feeling so loaded with there's just burdens all over the place. And I feel like at some point you want to get back to the way it felt, which was a lot lighter than it does right now.
Yeah, very well said. Now, I believe you do have a Denver Nuggets hoodie on, which is very nice. They're supporting your team, which they did very well, by the way, this season. Bright future, which leads me to my next question. There's been an awful lot of discussions about the GOAT in the NBA. Michael Jordan, LeBron James, whoever it is. There are people on different sides of the fence. I am a diehard Michael Jordan fan, so I will support him until I die. But when you look at the GOAT of MMA, it is very subjective. It depends on what you look for in a fighter and all of that. But there's so many great options to choose from. If you could put together a Mount Rushmore, who would be on that for you?
Well, first of all, it's not real subjective in the NBA because Michael Jordan is the guy. That is correct. I don't even know why. How can that even be up for debate? You know what I mean? So the MMA one is harder, and part of it is because obviously you're dealing in a lot of different weight classes. You're dealing in different eras at this point, even though MMA is relatively young, but you are dealing in different eras. Guys didn't cross paths, and it was a different sport when it started, obviously to where it's ended up. So I guess I would probably, I mean, I'm always going to have GSP. I just think because of the weight class, when you look at the average body size and how many people are in the welterweight division, to me, his run is unparalleled. And the way that he had to do it, he had to kind of outthink guys, beat them at their own games occasionally, dictate their wills with his wrestling, whenever. And he wasn't even a known wrestler. He had to kind of just put all this together as he went along. So I think I would still have him. I'd still put him in there. I think John Jones would be there for the same reasons. Except it's always weird with him. I feel like you got like some asterisks involved there, right? With his USADA problems and then his other troubles, which shouldn't factor into the GOAT conversation, but they kind of do. And then the way he's been winning lately, like he could be 0-2 in his last two defenses. You know what I mean? So I feel like we're kind of, I want to put him up there, but I also want to see how he does in the heavyweight division. I think that that'll be an interesting gauge to say if he's definitively the best or whatever. So he would be up there. Man, who else? I think Habib. It's crazy because he's active and he's fighting this weekend, obviously, but like at 28-0, man, in the lightweight division and what he's been able to do, where he's literally lost a single round, is just kind of I'm not sure your imagination can wrap around that. Like I wouldn't think that that's possible in today's, in the parity. Like everybody's very skilled these days. It's everybody's well-rounded. That's like an old term that people used to use for guys who kind of knew how to do it all. In fact, most guys know how to do it all now. So it's kind of for him to be doing it and continue to do it. And if he continues to do it this weekend, obviously that's another big feather in his cap. So I would probably put those three guys right in there. How about you? What do you got? Do you have some extras in here that I'm forgetting?
You and me seem to be right on the same train of thought here. I mean, Georges St-Pierre, I pride myself in being objective. He is my favorite mixed martial artist of all time. I will just get that right out of the way. But, I also like Michael Jordan and Tom Brady. So I just tend to like the GOATs. I don't know what it is. Georges St-Pierre, for me, as you said, more of a normal body type, welterweight, lightweight. Those divisions are just stacked. They always have been. They always will be. And for me, what he did, and he did everything. He never popped for steroids. He was a class act inside and outside of the cage. It's hard not to like him. I have him right there at the top. I feel like,
by the way, he was the first guy who professionalized, like, if you want to use a word like that, the sport, because I think when he became involved in the UFC, there was still like a wild notion that most of these guys were lunatics. You know what I mean? That there was something wrong with them, or they were just crazy to go in there. But then you have this guy who shows up in suits and he speaks normal and he speaks like a pro athlete and he handled himself like a professional. He knew how to handle the media. I just felt like he was the first guy to really, kind of gussy up the joint a little bit and make it seem like a legitimate thing,
For sure. I 1,000% agree with that. And, as you were saying about John Jones, his last couple of fights, he could potentially be 0-2. Yeah. I'm not quite sure how you score those nowadays. I feel like there should be maybe more judges or something done to maybe add more criteria to dissect who's winning the fight and who's not. But, what he's done recently makes me question a little bit if he's at the top, and then you look at him popping for steroids there. So that gets a little iffy. Habib, for me, he hasn't been in the UFC quite as long as some of these other guys. Sure. So I wonder about his level of competition, who he's faced over in Russia and whatnot. So I feel like there's still more to see from him. But you go back to some of the greats, and Fedor in his prime was right up there. There's just so many to choose from, but it's just interesting depending on who you talk to as to who they think is the best. And then you have someone that might not be on that GOAT level, but he clearly is probably the most popular MMA fighter in history, and that's Conor McGregor. And so it's just very tricky, but it's interesting to talk to someone like yourself and get those thoughts.
And I mean, you could easily I can make the case for Demetrius Johnson, because that guy, I think that he's the fighter's fighter. Like a lot of fighters would see him as the GOAT, even if he didn't get over on the larger scale for fans. And I mean, you look at somebody like Amanda Nunes and what she's able to do right now. You could easily put her on that list too, especially if she just finishes out her career the way she's going right now. If she finishes that way, she's clearly the best female fighter that we've ever seen. And I think that she would, you would have to put her on that list, wouldn't you? I mean, she would just be right there with those guys, if not above some of the names we're talking about. I think she would probably be above a couple of those names. So, it's fun to have these discussions. And I tell you what, the people who, that I know, and obviously like they know that I'm involved in the game, and they start to get into it. That's one of the first things they always want to discuss, right? Like they want to discuss these types of things. So it's always fun, man, and it kind of changes over time, right? Like you kind of figure out new things, but it's always a fun discussion.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on someone like a BJ Penn, who in his prime was an absolute monster, and then he's been around for probably too long now, and his record doesn't really dictate just how great of a fighter he was? I don't want to compare him and Anderson Silva, because Silva, his record is a little bit better than BJ's, but he, in my opinion, has stuck around a little bit too long. How do you gauge that when you're looking at all-time greats like BJ or Anderson?
That's also a toughie, but I feel like at some point you have to look at the whole, right? Like I think you got to look at the whole career Did they have a precipitous drop-off? Like Fedor, you mentioned Fedor. I feel like some people, they disinclude him, A, because they probably weren't around long enough to remember him fighting and just how good he was. But B, they're remembering as him getting beat up in a couple of fights. Like they've seen him be vulnerable. I feel like we've seen BJ for so long now, and it goes beyond just a vulnerability or where he's losing like maybe close decisions. I mean, the way he's getting whitewashed in some of these fights, I mean, he's just getting blown out. It's actually really sad. So you want to see him stop just because you don't want the last decade's BJ Penn to overrule the one that we saw, in the aughts, who was just, a beast. I really think he was one of the most dominant and most compelling champions in UFC history. Would I consider him a GOAT? It's really tough. See, this is then if you're looking at snapshots of fighters, like, if you take this era, because Anderson Silva and Jose Aldo and those types of guys, you could do the same type of thing. Yeah, he would be up there. But I tend to think of it like I like to think of it as a whole, like a whole career, and judge off of that, I guess. And right now, obviously, looking at BJ's last 10 years, you're not going to probably put him on that list. But I tell you what, I know you've been watching too. I know how good that guy is. Just talking about back then, he was definitely among the greatest.
Yeah, no doubt about it. He really was just one of my most favorite fighters to watch in his prime. Before we dive into UFC 254, I do want to ask you about, some of the other promotions potentially rivaling the UFC here moving forward. Bellator, clearly has been kind of like the second banana for a little while now, and they have that CBS Sports Network that they're starting to, have their shows there on. Do you feel like there is going to be a promotion to ever rival the UFC, or is it just going to be the UFC and then everyone else?
Well, ever's a big word. So that's like, I feel like there are, so let's put it this way. This sport is so chaotic, even in the business sense, like it's just chaotic. Things change so frequently. But the one constant, honestly, has been the UFC just continually growing its brand. And I think that they've had such a great run up to even to this point, but just checking boxes that I don't think anybody thought they were going to be able to do, right? Like I was at ESPN from 2010 to 2013, and I can tell you around there, nobody was talking about the UFC. They were not talking about MMA. It was very difficult to get good, placement. If you wrote a piece or whatever, it might be on the main page for just a minute and it was gone. It's like that type of thing. They didn't care. So for the fact that we're here, 7 years later, and it's a major partner with ESPN and the UFC is all over the place, is a major, coup. And when you look at even I know the Reebok deal was kind of ill-fated from the start, but the fact that they were partnered with Reebok, or that they ended up on Fox before ESPN and all of that stuff, I just feel like they're checking boxes the whole way and constantly kind of growing this thing. I'm not sure because they're such pioneers, I guess, and they've been the original and people are used to paying for it and they expect the quality. They kind of put those three letters in the same realm what they would in professionalism as the NBA or the NHL, whatever it is. It's going to be tough for somebody to come up and do it. I'm not sure how it can work, but it's the fight business. And so I feel like if it could happen in any sport, it could happen in fighting, but I don't really foresee it. Not in the near future. I think that it would have to come at some point, and I'm not sure it would be Bellator. I mean, we've kind of seen what they've been doing, and they're always dabbling. They're pushing their own thing, and they're finding ways to be competitive, and they're finding ways to be unique. I'm all for that, but can they overtake the UFC? I don't think so, and I don't see anything out there that could basically overtake the UFC right now.
Yeah, no, I have to agree with that. When Dana White walks away and he retires and is all done with the MMA game and UFC, is he going to be considered the greatest promoter of all time?
I mean, he's got to be, I think. I mean, as much as people can hate on him, first of all, when he's fascinating the whole way. I think that even the people who hate him are still fascinated by him as a human being, because he is a guy who literally puts out, and he uses that word very loosely all the time, but he puts out fires all the time, right? Like he always says that when his first foot hits the floor when he's getting out of bed, there's trouble that he's dealing with. I really believe that, and it ranges from little complaints from guys on the roster all the way to major business decisions and everything in between. You know what I mean? The fact that he's been able to just basically be as passionate as he is for this long, even after cashing out for $400 million or whatever it is, which for a lot of us would probably build into our indifference, right? I'm not sure I would care as much anymore if I had $400 million in the bank. I'm not sure I'd have the same enthusiasm, but and I think he did go through a little bit of a moment where he probably didn't care, but his passion is still there for it. And I really believe the passion is what has kept it going, man. And I think that, you know, you don't get offended as easily as him, or you don't get as defensive and all that stuff if you don't care about your product. And I think he cares about the product. He cares where it ends up. He cares its associations. I know that people get on to him about this a lot, but he cares about all that stuff, and he makes executive decisions on what to do and all that stuff. I really believe that he is the best promoter. I mean, there are some of the boxing guys have been very good over the years and stuff, but I honestly, I would have never thought that we'd be talking about the UFC the way we are, you know, even 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I mean, so the fact that he's grown it and continues to do that, yeah, I think he is.
Yeah, it really is truly remarkable. I'm sure you've had many, many more interactions with him than I have, but I'll tell you what, I'm from Maine. That's where I was born and raised. He's got a place here. He's here pretty frequently. I interviewed him for a regional show, the New England Fights promotion. He was up here, had Dana White looking for a fight, and he signed Devin Powell after that night. And before that, I was at a local restaurant that sponsors me, and he was there with a couple of buddies. And this is before I really even started doing any MMA work. And I came up to him and I said, you know, hey, Mr. White, I don't mean to bother you or anything. I just was hoping to shake your hand and this and that. He couldn't have been any nicer, any more accommodating. He took pictures with anyone that wanted. I feel like, you know, he has a lot of people don't have a really good understanding of just how good of a guy he is. He's got a tough job, and I think he does it pretty well.
If you stick around the game long enough too, and trust me, man, I have railed against Dana White I've probably written 100 columns basically calling Dana White every name in the book. But if you really get down to it, I mean, you're around the game long enough, you know that there are a lot of acts of generosity that basically go untalked about, and I would say that he's definitely there's a different streak to him that's probably underappreciated just because he's in such a limelight. He's making controversial decisions, and he's basically a walking controversy himself most times. But like he does, like I've heard so many stories where he's picking up tabs, like just kind of like out of nowhere, just picking up people's tabs and things like that in bars and restaurants, and there's just a lot of that sort of thing. So yes, he definitely has that side. And I will say that I have seen him many times where fans come up to him and he does exactly what you're talking about. I know you're more of a journalist than a fan, but I'm like, I've seen fans go up to him and he always has time for them. You know what I mean? So, so he's got that side for sure.
For sure. Well, UFC 254, Chuck, one of the very best cards of the year. I can't wait. I love the setup in Abu Dhabi. The only thing that I'm really disappointed about this particular card is I thought it was going to be like it normally is at 10 p.m. Eastern time, and I set up my engagement photos with my fiance on Saturday. So I'm in a pickle. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do, and I can't.
And you gotta get rid of the fiance. You gotta. No, I'm kidding. Come on, don't get in trouble.
Yeah, I'll be sleeping outside if I ever did that. But I'm really excited about this card. Obviously, headlined by the lightweight championship, Habib Nurmagomedov and Justin Gaethje. Co-main event, Robert Whitaker, the former champ, and Jared Cannonier. I want to start there. I'm a big Robert Whitaker fan. I just love his style. He didn't look all that great against Izzy. I will say that, but I did interview him fairly recently before this Cannonier fight, and he said he just feels rejuvenated. He needed some time away, and he feels like he's going to be the best Reaper that we've seen in a while now. What are you expecting here in this fight with a guy in Cannonier who's fought as big as heavyweight and is just a monster of a man with heavy hands? So it's a dangerous matchup.
Yeah. To be completely honest, man, I don't know what to expect in this fight. You mentioned Whitaker, and I think that's real valid, like what you're saying. I think when he got to the Izzy, I feel like we were seeing a diminished version of himself in that fight. I don't want to take away anything from Adesanya. I thought that was a brilliant performance, but I do believe that Whitaker was, fatigued, and he went through his process of basically telling ESPN and others, basically he was in a bad spot. He was, he needed to get reinvigorated again. I thought I saw a little bit of that against Till. Was it the exact same guy? I'm not sure. So I feel like now you get into a situation where maybe the sample size is bigger, and we just see how much that really, how much of that translates. Is he back to his old self, or is he a new guy, a new kind of fighter, but he has this enthusiasms back into it? I'm anxious to see it, man. I've always loved that guy. He's just a quiet dude who goes about his business, and his business is when he's on. I mean, he's probably one of the most impressive middleweights I've seen, man. I mean, when he is on and he's really bringing it. So I hope we see that version, but I'm not sure, man. And then you talked about Cannonier, and I feel like he's kind of that guy who from left field, has entered this space where suddenly if he gets by Whitaker, you're like, he becomes like a major challenge, and I think especially if he puts him away with another KO or TKO early. He's an interesting guy. I think he's actually really marketable, and the UFC hasn't figured this out yet, but he's, just his kind of, and being so into, crystals and, metaphysics and stuff. Like, you talk to him and he's out there a little bit, but I dig it. I think he's a different kind of personality, and he's not afraid of the microphone. So I'm interested to see, man, if he goes in there and he's able to, to do that kind of fight again, like he did in his last fight, which was over a year ago. It's kind of crazy, but if he goes in there and he just knocks Whitaker out, I'll be interested to see how the UFC handles him and if they can market him into kind of like a star a little bit. Because right now I feel like he's basically an anonymous guy, but he shouldn't be. So it'll be fun, man. This is gonna be a good one.
Yeah, I was actually watching the embeddeds this morning, and my God, Cannonier has muscles on top of muscles. He's absolutely shredded. And who was it? It was Walt Harris and Eric Anders were out there on the beach, and they were just cracking jokes with them just about how ripped he is and how he makes them look like they're out of shape or something. It's crazy how built this guy is. Do you think whoever wins this fight, whether it's Cannonier or Whitaker, that either of these guys have the tools to beat Izzy? I mean, they clearly have the tools, but do you think that they can, or do you feel like this is a guy that's going to be the middleweight king for a while?
Man, I would say that I was one of the more reluctant guys to believe in Adesanya, and I don't know why. Like, it was strange because he had some good performances and he had a proper escalation, even though it was really fast. He was fighting guys. He crammed in 6 or 7 fights in a small window of time. Some of them increasing in size, right? Like in terms of the scrutiny and everything else. But I was a little bit, I even thought with this Paulo Costa fight, I was like telling people, people always ask me, I was like, yeah, that's a live dog right there, man. Costa, like, that's a guy, I'm kind of leaning toward Costa going to that fight. But then you watch him fight and you see him just utterly do what he wants. And I'm like, okay, I'm undervaluing Adesanya at this point. You know what I mean? I'm finding reasons probably to think he's less than he is. And I'm like, at that point, I was done with it. So now I'm on board with this. This guy is going to be there for a while. I really believe that after watching that last fight. But I think it's cool that there's guys. So basically, if Whitaker were to get back to him again, I would be very interested in that fight just because of the kind of circumstances we laid out just a few minutes ago. I think that Whitaker there's a far better version of Whitaker that could go at Adesanya. I would like to see that. If not him and Cannonier is the guy, I honestly, with that kind of power, man, and his timing and everything else, like he's been around a while. That would be interesting too. I just think that you put either one of those guys and it becomes interesting. But if I had to call it right now, I'm picking Adesanya. You know what I mean? I think that he's the guy for a while. And I haven't seen the guy. There's not that one guy coming up right now where I'm like, but except for that one guy, that's going to be the guy. I don't see that guy yet.
Mm-hmm. To me, it sounds like you're leaning towards Cannonier in this fight against Whitaker. Am I right?
I am a little bit. But like I said, out of all these fights, and I love them when they're like this, when there are a lot of, I like feeling that I really don't know, that it feels like a coin flip, because to me it kind of does. If Whitaker is who he is, I obviously might change my mind, but I think Cannonier, he's looked very good, man, those last 3 fights, and he's getting it done. And I don't know. I just keep imagining, and maybe it's just because everything that you've seen recently, you just keep imagining clipping Whitaker and then the fight being over. That's what keeps playing through my head. So I think I am leaning that way.
Yeah, you and me are right in the same boat. My heart says Whitaker. My head is saying Cannonier. I really hope that I see a vintage Robert Whitaker in there come fight night, a guy that we saw against Yoel Romero that could take big shots, because I'm a big fan of him. I try and be objective and I take my bias aside, but this is a very, very interesting fight. I really could see it going either way. Now, the main event, obviously, this is just such an interesting matchup. I was listening to the new Jimmy Smith show on Sirius Radio, and he said that this will be the first time that Habib has actually fought an All-American wrestler inside of the octagon.
Really?
And that's interesting to me because when you watch the Iaquinta fight, he didn't really look his best, and Ray Janelle, looked fairly good against an undefeated phenom who's been running through people. And that makes me press pause with this fight with Gaethje, because when you see what he did with Ferguson, I just feel like he has the right mix of wrestling, takedown defense, scrambling, and then those monster hands that he has to potentially shock the world and get this upset win. What do you feel like is going to go down?
I hear everything you're saying there. I think that this is a different kind of fighter. I don't think that, obviously, Nurmagomedov has faced anybody like Gaethje before, and it goes just beyond his wrestling ability and his takedown defense and all that stuff. I just think that Gaethje is an opportunist and he's a berserker, and his chin, he believes in his chin. I think that those things, like, they add up to something very unique. I think if because I'm not. When Gaethje gets involved in a fight and it becomes a little bit like a bloodbath, or it's like, like guys are going to, I feel like he is not afraid of that kind of fight. In fact, he seems to really come to life. And sometimes you think that he's kind of has nothing left in him, and then all of a sudden he finds another gear. And I look at those things and I'm like, I just don't think that Nurmagomedov, for as dominant as he's been, I don't think that he's faced a guy quite like this. And it's vastly intriguing. I could see this fight going a number of ways. You mentioned the Al Iaquinta Nurmagomedov fight. I kind of know what you mean. Al Iaquinta probably did better than I suspected, but of course there was such extenuating circumstances given the, Nurmagomedov didn't 48 hours earlier, didn't know he was going to be fighting Iaquinta. Let's just throw that out there right away. So obviously that was a little bit different. I do think that Nurmagomedov is good in terms of knowing his opponents. So I think he's probably training specifically for a guy like, Gaethje and some of the things that are going to do. And I think he's smart. I think he knows how to nullify. One of his great things he can do is nullify guys who have like some extra offensive, whatever they're going to do. Obviously, Gaethje throws a lot of different crazy stuff, especially in close. And then those leg kicks, everything else. Dude, even just talking about this, I'm like, it just gets you all hyped up, because I'm like, I could see it going anyway. You could imagine 12 different scenarios for a fight like this. But it's also very easy to imagine Nurmagomedov doing exactly what he always does, which is just kind of burying his head and putting a guy down and just ground and pounding him. It's easy to imagine that too. So this is going to be wild, man.
Do you feel like the fact that Habib recently lost his father could potentially affect him one way or the other? I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like to be in his shoes. I mean, he was so close to his father. I lost my dad a couple of years ago now, and he was my best friend. I mean, I could barely go to work for a while. I was just clinically depressed. And when you're trying to get prepared for a fight against an assassin, I got to imagine that your head might not always be dialed in like you'd want it to be. Do you feel like that could play a factor in this fight?
Sure, I do actually. And I think that when you mention Nurmagomedov, obviously everybody kind of knows, if you follow the game, how much he cared for his dad, how entwined their lives were on every level, every single level. So, you imagine Nurmagomedov, that type of situation, it's like you feel bereft, like I'm sure he went through a long period, and he's still going through it, because you don't get over stuff like that. But everybody handles this stuff so differently. It's weird, especially for these guys that are competitors. The thing that gets me about it is that they were, so much of the competitive side of Habib was entwined through his dad. I think his father instilled that in him. So it's like, is he going to be missing that, or will he be able to, compensate and basically motivate through that? That remains to be seen. But I do think, I mean, like you mentioned, you've been through it. I've been through it too. I've lost my father, and I know that these things, they can work both ways for you. I feel like he's such a mentally tough guy that he will probably, if he's feeling without, I think he can put that aside and bring it and just narrow focus and focus on Gaethje, and then you might see some kind of emotional release afterwards. I think that that's what he'll do. But I mean, honestly, man, you know how it is. It could go either way on that. And if he doesn't look right, that would be the first thing I think of. I'd be like, is it because he's lost something so big he can't regain it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm leaning with the upset. I'm actually going to pick Gaethje, but I could see it going either way. To me, again, I'm just going to assume based on what you're saying, you're leaning towards Habib.
I am. You're very perceptive. I am leaning towards Habib, but it's more based on how do you pick against Habib. I would say that this is the one matchup that he's had where I don't feel too confident in that. I mean, I just think that Gaethje has a lot of kryptonite. You know what I mean? Like in the way he fights. I mean, everybody who goes into a Gaethje fight, it's like the Tasmanian Devil or something went through them. They look like they just survived a slasher film. I mean, these guys all look like they're just altered people coming out of these fights. I just, the Nurmagomedov's never faced a guy like this. So can he avoid that and like dictate his will? I think he can, but this is just realistically, man, this is one of those beautiful setups because you're not sure. And I think that's what's so exciting about it.
Yeah, for sure. Now, if Habib wins, he's going to be 29-0. He's made it clear he wants to retire 30-0. That's his goal. And he's also made it very clear who he wants in that matchup, which is the guy we say is probably the all-time GOAT, Georges St. Pierre. Can a 40-year-old GSP beat Habib in his prime?
Oh man, if we get to that point, and I do believe this is the one matchup GSP would come back for, because why wouldn't he? Right? He's got a little bit of the size. I think it kind of, so you take away like the years he's been away and all of that stuff, and you kind of throw some advantages over here. I think it would be extremely interesting. I think that GSP would be interested in that fight. Can he beat him? That it's one of those things that it's almost too mind-boggling. I think he could, because I think GSP is so compulsive with his training. He's so compulsive and obsessive with his opponents and stuff like that. I think that he would dedicate himself. Obviously, he would give him the right amount of time. I think he would show up the same guy. I really do. I think he's that competitive. And if he's at his best, and I know he'd be older, and it's tough when you get to 40 years old, man. Like it's tougher to be that guy, but I could see GSP doing that. And if he's right and he's doing his stuff, I could see him beating Habib. But that would be an amazing fight, man. I mean, if that's the way Habib does, if he gets through Gaethje and then he does his kind of swan song fight against GSP, the MMA world wins. You know what I mean?
I absolutely agree. That would be like Christmas to me. I would be just salivating at the thought of that fight. Now, not to kind of, talk bad about the rest of this card. I mean, the main and co-main event is fantastic, but the rest of the card maybe isn't as great as some of the other cards that we've seen this year. Is there one fight outside of the two big ones that you're really looking forward to that you feel like could, maybe steal the show or really shine here on fight night?
Based on the way the first fight went down, I'd probably say the Cutelaba fight, right? Like that fight to me looks like fun. If nothing else, it's going to be fun because those guys are just like headhunters, and the way the theatrics were going on in the first fight and the way it was stopped, I'm like, to me, I feel like something crazy is probably in store for that fight. I just feel like it's the natural way that those dudes are going to, their chemistry will create that.
Well, look, again, for anyone out there that's watching this, you got to get this pay-per-view, UFC 254, this Saturday. And again, Habib and Gaethje main event, Whitaker and Cannonier co-main. It really is a couple of fantastic marquee matchups there. Mr. Mindenhall, I really appreciate you doing this. Again, I think you're absolutely one of the best writers in the game, and it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Let's do it again sometime soon.
Call me Chuck, buddy. All right. Take care, man.